On today's Locked On Texan podcast, underrated yet valuable, which Texan player can aid to the Texans' success this season. And David Culley is back in the news discussing Davis Mills and his tenure as the Houston Texan head coach. Stick around for that conversation as well. We'll see how it all plays out this season. But Cody, let's kick off the show.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every other day until later this month. I'm John Hickman, joined, of course, by none other than Cody Davis. Welcome back to kick off the week, discussing the Houston Texans. Been away for a couple of days. And as training camp is around the corner, was it on the 26th of this month, Cody?
Yep, 26 or the 28, one of the two.
Later in the month, in the 20s, of course, the Houston Texans training camp will kick off. 90-some-odd players. The Texans will have their hands filled in regarding to who they're going to cut, who they're going to keep, who they're going to designate to the practice squad, who's going to be starters. They're going to fill out that depth chart. Everything will come into play starting really early in the year after the draft when they had OTAs. But training camp is where guys can get out there, bust some ass, show coaches why they belong and why they should be ranked maybe ahead of players or not. And Cody and I thought it was a very important we'll take this opportunity ahead of training camp to discuss the Texans veterans and which underrated player could really aid to the Houston Texans' success or lack thereof. But we think that Houston will be a little bit more successful this year than they were last year. And Cody, I'm going to let you kick it off. I think this is a very important conversation before I pass it over to you because we get caught up in the bigger names, right? We get caught up in the Mechis and ready to see the rookies play and the Stingley. We've heard a lot about Stingley, Mechie, and Christian Harris and Davis Mills, all of those names on the Texans roster that kind of stick out more than the other guys. But when you have to fill a roster of 53 men, when you have 3 levels of football to play, every count, every snap matters. Cody, what veteran for you is very important, underrated, but yet valuable for this Texan team this year?
Ross Blacklock.
Ross,
simple.
Hometown.
Yes, sir. And look, the reason why I went with Ross Blacklock is because of this. We here on Locked On Texans, other reporters, fans, we have talked a lot about Nick Caserio and the great job that he did throughout the 2022 NFL draft. And the only reason why we did not give him a perfect evaluation is because we all wanted to see him to address the defensive line more so than he did during the draft. Of course, during the draft, you picked up Thomas Booker, and I think he's going to be a very good addition to this team. However, you remember, after day one of our draft evaluations, I came on this show and I said, look, I like Keon Green, but the fact that you had a guy like Jermaine Johnson still on the board, you had an opportunity to draft him and you didn't. That's the only knock that I had against Nick Caserio when evaluating his draft. However, John, the more I look into the Texans' defensive line core, the more I come to the realization that the Texans kind of have a solid defensive line. When you take a look at the talents of John Grenard, Roy Lopez, Malik Collins, Thomas Booker, a guy that I just mentioned, and even veteran like Mario Addison, a guy who literally just recorded 7 sacks last season, the Texans' defensive line is pretty solid. However, I want to see this defensive line go from solid to good. And I think Ross Blacklock holds the keys in order for the Houston Texans to be successful at getting better at the defensive line. Because look, Ross Blacklock is going into his 3rd or 4th season as a member of the Houston Texans, and throughout his first 2 years, we have seen flashes of his talents. However, he is not consistent. If he could find a way to get consistent, I do believe you add him to the talent that is already on that defensive front. I do believe that is going to be enough to get the Texans' defensive line back to where it was. Kind of during the time when you had guys like J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney and DJ Reader. And look, I get it, I understand it. Those are big name guys. However, when you take a look at the production and how solid and how good that defensive line was, the Texans can definitely repeat that same production. But of course, it's going to take a lot of more hands to get that defensive line to where it was a couple years ago. And I do believe that Ross Blacklock will be a very key addition to that.
And I would like to say this about Ross Blacklock. As much as we want to sit here and say that he hasn't been consistent, neither has this organization. And when some sense of consistency came to this organization in terms of the coaching staff and how they kind of on the fly last year kind of got settled in, especially a little bit down the stretch, you saw a better version of Ross Blacklock. I think Ross Blacklock stepped into a very unfair situation. Remember, he was a part of that DeAndre Hopkins trade, that second-round pick. They used that on Ross Blacklock. A pick right after him was Jonathan Taylor. So he has a lot of pressure under him. I do think that Ross Blacklock is one of those players across this defensive front that Houston really does need, to take the next step. Speaking of the defensive line, what has been the Houston Texans' biggest issue the past 2 seasons?
Stopping the run.
Stopping the run. You got a nosebleed, it's going to run. Don't worry about it. And that's how the Houston Texans defense has been in the past 33 games. It's easy to run down their throat. And, Cody, you went with Ross Blacklock. I think Ross Blacklock is one of those defensive line players that should be able to add a bunch of different aspects to his game to be better. But stopping the run, I want to highlight Malik Collins and Roy Lopez. For me, Malik Collins, 29 total tackles last year, 8 stuff, 13 pressures. The career years in those numbers, and we also look at Roy Lopez, who also had 5 tackles for loss last season, was a anchor for that defensive front whenever he played, made his guys around him job easier, especially at the linebacker position. 31 combined tackles last year, and he didn't even play almost half of those snaps last season. So he was also one of those rookies, that the Houston Texans had to, kind of find some time to play. Whenever he did play, there were moments where he was the best rookie out on the field. Plain and simple. And I think that's fair to say. So when I look at both of those guys, again, we are right now in Texan country history. Texas country, we are very hype about these rookies. We're very hype about what Marlon Mack could possibly do. And now that you have your tackle situation, your right tackle solidified with Titus Howard, super excited about Davis Mills. Like a lot of things we're hype about here in Houston, and I get it, but they're the small details that matter. There's no way Houston is going to be able to win games, a handful of games next season, if they are still allowing almost 5 yards per carry. If you're still allowing 100 rushing yards per game, it's not going to happen. You're going to make your job a whole lot harder. And if teams are able to just kind of run all over you, then you're not going to be able to get the ball back in your offensive hand, because normally when teams are able to run, they control the clock. So I'm looking at Malik Collins here, and I'm looking at Roy Lopez as 2 guys that I think coming into this camp, they really like Malik Collins. They re-signed him after that 1-year deal. He had a rough season with the Raiders, bounced back last season, posted some career highs. I think that in this 4-3 defense, he's much more comfortable playing that deep tackle role. And with Roy Lopez, here's my challenge to Roy. Become valuable to this team to where they're not just leaving you at the 1 technique. They feel comfortable at times, depending on the situation, putting you out there at that 3 technique, moving you from that 0 nose and maybe being a little bit more versatile with you. He came into camp, OTAs, looking a whole lot better. Got the NFL body on him now. I think he's quicker, light on his feet. But between Ross Blacklock, between Malik Collins, and between Roy Lopez, these defensive linemen, particularly in the interior, they all have to step up next season to limit the big runs against the Houston Texans.
Before moving on, I do want to say this, John, since we are talking about underrated veterans, I do believe Eric Murray and Jonathan Owens, is really important for them to step up their game. Yes, I know when you take a look at the state safety position, you mentioned it. We're all excited to see what these rookies can do. Of course, that means Jalen Petrie. However, Jalen Petrie is going to have to go through a learning curve. And in order for Petrie to
Absolutely.
kind of start getting to the peak that we're hoping for him to get, he's going to need some help from his veterans. And I understand it. I know you don't like Eric Murray. Jonathan Owens did show some promise towards the latter half of last season, but if those two guys can come in and actually help Petrie find his niche in the NFL, I think that's going to be very important for not just Petrie, but for the Houston Texans as well.
Right now, the safety depth chart stands as follows, excuse me. Eric Murray, Terrence Brooks, those are your strong and free safety starters. Jalen Petrie, MJ Stewart, got from the Browns. He may actually be a good piece for Houston. Then you would look at Jonathan Owens, Graylin Arnold, and Tristan McCullum, all at the safety spot. So Houston does have a handful of safeties. Again, starting in the next couple of weeks, they're going to have their hands filled with trying to designate guys to the practice squad, who's going to come off the bench, who's going to start, who's getting cut. It's that time of the year I really love, Cody. That football time of the year. And about football comes money. There's a lot of different ways you can make some money this offseason and this season, and that is with betonline.net. They continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball. Shout out to them Stros, smacking ass. I love to see it. And BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all of your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action at BetOnline, because BetOnline.
I've loved being the head coach of this football team, Cody. Now, the thing about it, there's been some ups and downs, more downs than ups, but it has been everything I thought it would be. I wish we'd have had a few more wins, but we came here with the process, and we're staying with the process. We're going to stay the course, and I feel like at this point, that with where we are, that the fact that we've stayed the course and that we're following the process, there are things that are starting to get better for us, and we're starting to see some positive things happening with the franchise right now.
That was a clip from David Culley the day when he was released by the Houston Texans after one season. And the reason why I wanted to bring that clip up again is because last week David Culley appeared as a guest on the Outkick Media podcast talking about his one season being the head coach of the Houston Texans. And John, I really do believe that when you go back, you listen to that podcast and you take a listen to what everything David Culley had to say about his time being the head coach of the Houston Texans, I really do believe that this next topic is semi-important because, look, first and foremost, Culley talked about how crazy it was being the head coach of this organization during the time Deshaun Watson was on the verge of demanding the trade, and we all know what happened. He gets hired, Deshaun Watson's demand the trade, and then it's basically all hell from that point on. But David Culley said something really interesting in that podcast. He said that when he took the job to become the head coach of the Texans back in January of 2021, he did not believe that it was going to be a one and done tenure. And he felt even more so about that statement towards the end of last season. And that is really important because, John, listeners, viewers, you guys remember, going into week 15, week 16 of the regular season, us here on Locked On Texans, other media members, we all talked about the possibility of the Texans bringing back David Culley for an additional year. We talked about them not being in a position to bring in a new head coach because there was still a lot of chaos going on with the organization. But at the same time, say what you want about David Culley, he did succeed some modest expectation. You're talking about a team who a lot of people had winning no more than one game, which was the opener against the Jacksonville Jaguars. But under David Culley, this was a a team that won 4 games. Could have been 5 or 6 had his coaching experience on the sideline been a little bit better. And the one thing that I always talked about every time we mentioned the possibility of David Culley coming back for an additional years was the respect that the locker room had for him. There was a lot of chaos going on inside the organization, as we all know, but at the end of the day, a lot of those players went out there and played hard for David Culley himself. So, John, when you hear David Culley say that he believed that he was going to have more than a one and done tenure here in the city of Houston, plus you also consider the fact that he navigated this organization possibly through the worst time in franchise history, do you or do you not think that he was given a fair opportunity as the head coach of the Houston Texans?
Doesn't matter. Listen, I think that he thought he was going to be back for another year. But did he get a fair shot? I mean, no. If we're being honest, no. No Deshaun. And I thought that was very interesting to hear him say that he spoke to Deshaun one time over Zoom
for 30 minutes.
And Deshaun was like, no matter what you say over Zoom, he couldn't get the proper respect to at least do this face-to-face. But no matter what happened, I'm not playing for the Houston Texans this season, and I'm prepared to sit. When you start your tenure off like that, I mean, listen, I've been very critical of Houston Rocket head coach Steven Silas, but I'm also a fair man. And when you start your coaching tenure off with James Harden and Russell Westbrook trying to get up out the door in your first season, and then after that you're catapulted into a rebuild where, I don't think there's much success there that you can possibly have early on. Same goes for Culley. You get hired, you're ready to come in to help win more games than what the Houston Texans did that previous year. And when you first get to town, you get hired, you hear all the media saying he's not fit and this won't do much for Deshaun. Your very first task when you get to town to Houston is try to talk to Deshaun. Well, you did that, but it was over the internet. Right? He couldn't even
which to his defense, it was still COVID protocols at the time.
I'm not buying that. Anyways, and then he doesn't play, and then you don't have a lot of money, so you can't sign free agents. And Houston right now isn't a place for free agents to willfully and cheerfully go. You got to go with Tyrod. He get hurt. Davis Mills throwing the mix. Like, there's so much that goes on in his first 7 months before week 10. You were not set up for success. I do think that David Culley believed that he should have been brought back, and maybe he thought that there was a conversation somewhere that he was going to have more time than 1 year, which, if I'm going to be fair for Steven Silas, I got to be fair for David Culley. All I'm saying is I'm grateful we are not back with David Culley as the head coach. I think David Culley is a great guy. The Houston Texans gave him a great care package. I mean, he's going to make, like $19 million or something over the next 3 to 4 years. But understand this. Nick Caserio was not going to ride till the wheels fall off with David Culley, because those wheels would have fallen off way before his 6-year contract ends. I think so. And I still don't believe Nick Caserio has found his end-all, be-all coach. Let me say that. But it was never going to be David Culley. David Culley is going to be a stain on Nick Caserio's tenure, because I always felt he rushed for no good reason. David Culley was not the answer. I don't know why the Houston Texans bypassed all of the information and the output that creative group firm that they had last year that was headlined by Andre Johnson and Tony Dungy. I don't know why they did bypass all of that, but they rushed with David Culley. It was terrible. It was a terrible experience. They should never go back. It was unfair to him. It was unfair to this fan base. But now we're here with Lovie Smith.
David Culley also mentioned the progression that he experienced with Davis
And
Mills.
that was a
And
great conversation to
he
have.
said, and John, this might be something I don't know if you want to talk about today, save it for tomorrow, but he said when you take a look at the quarterbacks who came out in last year's draft, i.e. 2021, Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, you know the class, and you take a look at the quarterbacks who came out in this year's class, David Culley said he truly believes that if you do a redraft, Davis Mills could be the first quarterback taken off the board.
Wouldn't necessarily be against that. Now, mind you, the first quarterback taken off the board was your boy Kenny Pickett, who played at Pitt. He was drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I still can see a reasoning for the Pittsburgh Steelers to draft Kenny Pickett at that position because there's a lot of familiarity there, being in Pitt and those connections on top of the weather. But after that, I wouldn't be shocked or surprised. Listen, Davis Mills has a lot of great mechanics as a quarterback. And again, it was unfair to him being thrown in that process as early as he did with, I think, one of the most incompetent play callers of all last season. But I wouldn't be against that. I don't. Again, I think Kenny Pickett will still overall be the number one quarterback because of where he played and who was drafting at that time with that pick. But Mills has been getting high praise since high school, guys. My boy John Crumpler, he was also out over the weekend at Davis Mills quarterback camp or something along those lines, and he talked to one of his QB coaches that has been his QB coach, private QB coach, since middle school. Now, before I talk about how important that is for Davis Mills, who can hire and afford a private quarterback coach in the 7th grade? That was mind-blowing to me. I've never heard of it. However, I am an inner city youth product from Houston. So, but his quarterback coach, and his name escapes me, so forgive me, I spoke highly about him. And he's been saying Davis Mills has always put in the work. He's always been this talent of a quarterback. So he's always had that talent. It would have not shocked anybody. I don't think so because of how high they were speaking of him last year. A lot of scouts were speaking very highly of Davis Mills. The one knock, time in college. Games played in college. But when they were checking off boxes for skill set, frame, sneaky speed, arm strength, touch on the ball, Davis Mills checking off all those boxes. Check, check, check. Wouldn't have shocked me at all. And I'm glad to hear David Culley, who has never came off as a spiteful individual during his time in Houston, still continue to big up that quarterback because I do believe they had a great relationship last season.
Yeah, they did, and I could attest to that. John, I don't want to say much about this because you already know where I stand. I do believe it's very close between him and Mac Jones when you take a look at the draft class of 2021 and the draft class of 2022. If Davis Mills won't be the first quarterback taken off the board, he would damn sure be the second.
I can see that. And this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it is now almost impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. My wife needed a battery last week, and nobody in our area had that battery for her type of car. Something along the lines of the car isn't a favorable car, and a lot of people don't carry the parts like that. So what did I do? Got my phone, typed in rockauto.com, and found the battery for the car that we needed. I saved some time and I saved some money when I shopped with Rock Auto. Guys, why choose to spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership where you can go ahead and tap in and shop with rockauto.com, a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and Rock Auto prices are always reliably low. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On Texans in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Thanks for making Locked On Texans your first listen today. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league because the offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. Speaking of breaks in the actions, as of right now, there's a break. No, no sentencing for Deshaun Watson at this time. They are still the NFL and the NFLPA. Both sides are still unclear about the future, so we are awaiting news in regards to whether or not it will be indefinite, as Cody has said several times on the show. Will there be a number on that suspension, or if there's a suspension at all? As of right now, I think it's very important to just at least put it out there. Tony Busby seeks documents regarding the NFL's investigation of Deshaun Watson, including the transcripts of this week's disciplinary hearing. I'll say this. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. If Busby feels like his clients, who the four that he has left, who did not sign the not NDA, the settlement that is basically a clause now in the investigation. If he feels like his clients have not had a fair shake, the tables have been uneven, whatever he feels, I'm all for it. Again, guys, this is still a case of he said, she said, abuser, sexual misconduct abuser versus the abuse. And so I'm a fair guy. If there was right done, then we go with the right. If there was wrong done, then we go with the wrong. But right now, it does come off as Tony Busby feels as though the NFL did not do a proper investigation, which has been a topic of discussion for a very long time now. And so, first, it was Deshaun Watson. The Texans also got looped up in the lawsuit as well for knowing about Deshaun Watson's side missions. And now, Tony Busby is going after the NFL. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. If he can find something that says, hey, you guys lacked in this area, you promised us you didn't, that changes the entire outlook and landscape of this case for Deshaun Watson, his team, and Tony Busby's team as well.
The one thing I'm going to say about this, John, today is July 5th, 2022. A lot of people, including myself, was preparing for a Deshaun Watson punishment. There were some reports that came out said that the league can actually make an announcement during the 4th of July weekend. Like I just mentioned, it is now July 5th. But I would say the NFL, they are still trying to get this taken care of before the start of training camp. Training camp for the Cleveland Browns will begin, at least for the veterans. They will report to training camp on July 26th. So it doesn't matter if it was the July. Yeah, they literally have 3 weeks to try to get this taken care of, because there's no way they could let this linger over the Browns franchise, over the NFL, knowing that this is an organization that is still trying to decide whether or not if they're going to have Deshaun Watson for the 2022 campaign. We know there's a lot of politics that also goes on with this as well. So, we should be hearing something very soon regarding the suspension of Deshaun Watson. But I would say, of course, this is something that we got to keep talking about. We got to keep reporting, because not only is it a former member of the Houston Texans, but at the same time, whatever punishment that they decide for Deshaun Watson is definitely going to affect that first round draft pick, whether that be just for 2023 or, like I'm predicting, 2023 and 2024 as well.
I would like to say this. I think it will be very hard for Tony Busby to get his hands on those documents.
Oh, yeah.
Nearly impossible. But, what Kevin Garnett said, anything's possible. I think it's kind of funny that the Browns moved on from a quarterback that was, all bought in, played hurt, had a terrible season this past season, but their reasoning behind it was we wanted an adult at quarterback. And now you may have to crawl back to him. What if they call Baker Mayfield and he's like, new phone, who is this? I would love to see.
They just need to go ahead and trade my boy, man. Stop holding on to that boy, man. Let's trade my guy, dog.
He ain't going nowhere. I think he will be a Cleveland Brown for at least the first 5 weeks of the season, and then Carolina may make a call. There'll be some team around the league that may not be 100% happy with their quarterback situation. I wouldn't be surprised if Atlanta gives a call as well.
Texans, first half of the season, let's say there's some promise, and the one issue at quarterback is Davis Mills. Do the Texans put in a call?
No. If that's the issue, if Davis Mills is in fact the issue this season, then Houston will wait to draft one in the 2022 NFL Draft. Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Make sure you are checking us out on YouTube at Locked On Texans. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Like, retweet, subscribe, comment, the whole nine. Run those numbers up, baby.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.